Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education inside the classroom and out. My name is Marc.
And I'm Nick Simone.
How you doing today, Nick?
I'm doing well. A little under the weather, but I'm going to fight through it. Yourself?
You're a gamer when it comes to podcasting.
I already sense the sarcasm, but that's okay.
I don't think there was any sarcasm in that. Today I wanted to discuss something I know that has been on your mind lately, and it has to do with the world of testing. I know there was an article that came out a few weeks ago in the New York Times that definitely garnered both of our attention, and it had to do with the, I guess, current and soon to be former Secretary of the U.S. Department of Education, Arnie Duncan, walking back the amount of or the quantity of testing that goes on in our public schools across the country. And I thought it was a very fascinating article. I definitely wanted to discuss that with you and get your take on it.
Oh, I'm very eager for this discussion. I remember when the article came out, I had sent out messages to all of my students, and I got very humorous ones sent back to me about the proposals.
What were their some of their
Oh,
what was
think
some of their feedback?
Oh, I mean, on the app that I use, it's just they can send back quick messages. So it was things like, it's about time. What took them so long? Why don't they come sit in the classroom? And then a couple of other funnier ones.
What I thought was particularly amazing, and we'll put a link to the article in our show notes. But he says in the article, they quote Arnie Duncan as saying, quote, "But I can't tell you how many conversations I'm in with educators who are understandably stressed and concerned about an overemphasis on testing in some places and how much time testing and test prep are taking from instruction." And then he goes on to say, "It's important that we're all honest with ourselves. At the federal, state, and local level, we have all supported policies that have contributed to the problem in implementation. We can and will work with states, districts, and educators to help solve it." I thought that was such a brilliantly phrased political statement because essentially what he's saying is we set fire to your house, but we are absolutely committed to helping you call 911 and getting the firefighters there as soon as possible to save at least some of your precious belongings, and we'll help we'll help mop up the ash when they're finished. I mean, I love how he basically throws the culpability into the hands of everybody when it was clearly them pushing all of this nonsense down onto us, making us jump through hoops for extra money through Race to the Top or through legislation like No Child Left Behind. And then, which of course wasn't Duncan, it preceded Duncan, but you may as well throw it in there as well. And then like the knight in shining armor acknowledging that, they may have made some slight miscalculations, but don't worry, we'll help you. There's basically blood on all of our hands and we'll help you clean it.
I,
So
yeah, I
that's
mean,
just part one that's frustrating me about this piece.
isn't it fair to say that there has been no president and no education secretary in the short department's history who has put a greater emphasis on testing in the classroom?
That's right.
And that will be his legacy. And I know that they're going to try to argue that it was necessary, but I think we will look back on this and say it was the dark ages in educational policy.
It's not that they've made some mistakes and we can sort of just clean it up and then it's over with, but there is this ongoing nightmare that is associated with testing now, and how that has stigmatized education, forgetting about even Common Core, just putting it aside for a second, and the botched implementation of Common Core, but just the over testing has left such a bad taste in students' mouths, in parents' mouths, boards of education, and other community leaders. And now it has everybody pushing back, even on tests that are valid and necessary. Which, ironically, in the article, they start going into the new movement, which is the people saying, but let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. And now there's the movement to save testing because they feel like this about face is going to take people away from the proper amount of testing. The whole thing is just so it's so insane. I guess I can only liken it to if you're listen, there were problems with education. We know that there were. So imagine you're standing in the shower and it's just like a little too cold. So you don't turn off all the cold water and put on all the hot water in trying to remedy your problem. You have to find smaller ways, incremental ways to make changes. And they just absolutely didn't do that. And now you're left with people feeling burned and frozen and basically shell shock, and they don't want to go back, just to finish the metaphor, to go back in the shower again. And that's how people feel. And now they're just going to walk it back as if it's something that you could easily just bring back or reset to the proper levels of testing. And they have destroyed that. And I don't think they're fully appreciating, or they are fully appreciating and just don't want to acknowledge it.
Right. Well, the damage is done, but at the same time, it's our job as educators to make up for the lost time. And I think this is a good moment to maybe explore where they came up with these random percentages of class time for how much testing should take place.
Can you
I,
take us through that? I
uh,
thought that was particularly
I didn't.
humorous.
Well, I mean, I might be guilty here. Was there an actual? It says originally it was 2.3% of class time.
Yes.
Was that part of a policy that I wasn't aware of?
You didn't know about the 2.3 policy?
And
We've
that
been implementing that full force in my school.
oh my god. So so they want to go from 2.3% of class time to 2% of class time as if that's the magic formula to fix everything.
I'm pretty sure I read a Malcolm Gladwell book where he said that 2% is the exact number
Oh,
that you want to use.
you came prepared today. You got lots of information.
Well, I mean, I read one Malcolm Gladwell book, so I guess that puts me somewhere on the spectrum here.
Oh, but that seems to be the main thrust of their reform. And when I read it, I guess I was confused because my question is what do they constitute as testing time? What do they constitute just the assessment? Do they constitute the assessment and the pre-assessments that might be given to evaluate? Do they does that include a vocab quiz, a spelling test that kids take in elementary? I was just very,
Uh,
very perplexed about it.
they don't go into it that in depth in the article, unfortunately. I wish they did, just to satisfy that curiosity. But they did give a statistic. They say about, on average, 112 mandatory standardized tests are taken between pre-K and high school graduation, averaging 8 tests a year. And they said that eighth grade is where it typically hits the hardest, where students are consuming an average of 20 to 25 hours, or 2.3% of school time, in testing. So it sounds like that's just the standardized testing and not the vocabulary tests. It also doesn't seem to include AP tests or IB or ACTs, SATs. So I think they're just simply talking about the standardized exams given from the state.
And I know I've said this before. To me, the actual test is not the damaging part of education. We've always taken tests and we've survived. It's the emphasis that is put on the test
Hmm.
and what that is doing to the teaching, what that's doing to the way a teacher approaches the classroom. It's not the actual sitting down of a test, and we can explore that or maybe discuss that later on. But
With
I'm
an exception, the only exception I would throw in there is for the little kids who are learning how to bubble a scantron before they can even really hold a pencil properly. That's terrible. That's troubling. They shouldn't have to worry about standardized exams in that type of format at that age, especially the little ones who are sitting there for multiple days consecutively
well,
worrying
what
about,
grade do you mean?
I'm talking about third grade,
See,
second grade,
but we took tests in second and third grade.
not for 3 days straight,
Oh well, that okay.
over a span of 2 weeks.
That's true. That's true.
That's what I'm saying. I
Yes.
remember taking, maybe it was a morning. But
Yes.
the other thing, since you talked about emphasis, my teachers only emphasized it slightly. I only knew that we were having the test, and I only knew that we got a piece of paper that had a percentile, a few weeks later or a couple months later, and that was really all. And that was, I was my job was to go to class and listen to my teachers and do my work and try my best, and that was really the overriding requirement, and it wasn't about how I'm gonna perform on these exams. At
Right.
least that's not how I was meant to feel.
But that's what I'm trying to say is, and by the way, maybe have a few kickball games every now and then also. Um, but
Oh, we were playing asses up, who are you kidding?
uh, but that's my point. In 3rd grade, I remember sitting for a test, but I don't remember any emphasis being placed on it at all. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure if I knew I was taking the test that day. I think they may have just when we came in the morning, we sat down and we took a test. And to me, that can be a very effective tool and assessment to see how students are learning. But when you take those tests and you put the results in the newspaper and you want to use it to evaluate teachers,
Of
that's when
course.
the entire game changes. And that's when now these 2nd and 3rd graders are feeling enormous pressure, unfairly, as we all agree, because teachers and principals and school districts are feeling enormous pressure. And that's where the problem lies.
There's a financial component here as well. Don't forget now, if you have students who don't reach a certain benchmark on these exams, you have to provide academic intervention services the following year for those students. So not only if you fail to reach a certain number does it hurt just in an educational sense, in a moral sense, but you then have to provide additional class time and seat time and instructors, and that means training and money. So there's a lot on the line for a school district or a school building, in addition to just the number that it appears in the newspaper. So you get down to dollars and cents. If your numbers are too low, you're then required to offer additional classwork or class time.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to sum up and say that I don't think the decrease from 2.3 to 2% is going to make a enormous difference in the the problems that we have right now.
Well, that's like 40%, isn't it?
That sounded like a Common Core math problem.
Yeah, it could be.
Oh, this could eat this the jokes would be rampant on this one.
I know. Well, I think we're doing our best to at least work some of them in. But you mentioned testing and we talked about standardized testing. But how do you define testing other than these year-end summative standardized assessments?
This is something I've grappled with tremendously in my career because as the kids get older, the number of tests that they take on a regular scheduled day, it can be very daunting, and kids they're overwhelmed by it. And I've always said, I don't know how you feel about this, but when we were in college, we had so much more time. First of all, in the course of the day, to do our schoolwork, and when at least I remember
Is
when
that what I was supposed to be doing during the day?
and,
Oops.
and when it did come time for a midterm or a final, the schedule was spread out so that you wouldn't have 4 and 5 tests on one day.
Right.
When I think about a middle school or a high school kid today who has, I mean, what would we say? Anywhere from 5 to, I mean, I know there's some kids that have 9, but what,
Mhm.
5 to 7 core
Yeah,
classes.
on a typical schedule.
And so how often do those teachers have to give a test? Because if you start to add it up, if the do the teachers give a test once a week? Do they give a test once every 2 weeks? Once every 3 weeks? What's the difference between a quiz and a test? Does the length of the test make a difference? It really amounts to kids basically having tests in an ongoing cycle all year long that they're constantly feeling, I think, the pressure.
So, what's the solution to that? Because I could hear the concerned teachers who don't believe that they're over testing in their given subject area, but they want to have a number of assessments because they don't want perhaps too much weight to fall on any one given test in case a student doesn't do particularly well. So if that's the case, they want to spread the wealth, so to speak. But when you start to figure out the math and look at the calendar and you're talking about a typical marking period is about 10 weeks, you know, if you could be giving 4 or 5 assessments if you're looking to test every 2 weeks or so, just so you have multiple assessments? It's almost, I guess this is my question. Where do you draw the line between the right amount of testing and too much testing, given the fact that there are students and parents who want a greater number of assessments, so
I know.
it dampens the damage of one misstep, in a given marking period.
Can you assess and test kids without having to call it a test? Is
Well,
that
there's a great question.
yeah? And I feel as if you can, because I think when kids are told you have a test, now the blood pressure already will go up slightly because now there is a defined number that's going to be attached to how
Hmm.
well I perform. And of course that's necessary.
Right.
But is it necessary as frequently as maybe we're doing it right now? Can you come into class? The best assessments I've ever given is, and I, of course, teach social studies, is when I just test the kids what they know without them having studied the night before. I want kids who are actually amassing a great wealth of historical knowledge that they're going to keep with them, that they're
Hmm.
not going to just prepare for a test one night and forget it the day after. And I think you can assess how much kids know throughout the year without having to constantly call it a test that you're taking.
So let me play devil's advocate and work through that scenario. So you're giving these informal assessments or tests, and are they graded?
They don't have to be. No. And I know that that creates the issue for grades at the end of the market period. Now, of course, I do give tests. I don't want to make it sound like, of course, we know I do that. But
Right.
I don't know if I give them as frequently as as all teachers. And I'll give you an example. For a middle school class, I might come into the room and say to them, all right, we're going to take a test today. But it becomes a group effort oral test where I'm asking them questions and they have to, as a group, be able to answer, I make it a competition. You have to answer, you know, 10 out of 12 questions right, but you're only allowed to answer once each. So you work together and they get so excited and they're
Hmm.
into it. And then you may say, if you guys do it as a group, give you points on a homework or points on the next, or no homework, give them a reward, and they
Hmm.
get pumped and they're into it and they want to remember things and they want to answer correctly. They work together. They'll say things like, "Oh, that's the hard one. Let's make sure we, use our,
Collective
yeah."
resources. Right.
I don't see what I mean, and they're excited and they're enthusiastic, and I still feel like it might be accomplishing the same thing as bubbling in 25 multiple choice questions. Which, by the way, when it is a multiple choice test, I, too often I think you realize kids don't study for them anyway because they know they can come in and they can put something down on the paper.
Right.
When it's a written answer, when it's short answers, when it's essays, they have to be able to put something down. And if they don't study, they're going to be staring at a blank piece of paper.
Well, so now you're talking about the ugly underbelly of the test, which is grading the test. And that is often a line of demarcation for teachers, because there's obviously a tremendous amount of work and time that goes into preparation and goes into making the lessons as good as they could be, uh, hopefully keeping up with teaching practices and their content area and so on and so forth. And then you pile on all of their additional, clerical or administrative responsibilities within or professional responsibilities within the building. And then you get to the pile of papers. And this is sometimes where you find the greatest inequity within a school building, because some people are walking out with a crippling amount of papers in multiple bags, and other people walk out with their car keys and their cell phone.
Uh, oh, you're just going to end on that note?
Well, I figured
Yeah,
I'd leave it on the T for you to hit out of the park.
I have nothing to say about that other than my colleagues often will say, when you will not have any papers to grade? June. So there will
Hmm.
always be a pile that you'll need to grade, and that's just part. We can maybe explore that at a later date in another podcast, but papers are always going to be there for certain subjects.
Well, unless teachers opt to use multiple choice, in which case their grading time is cut in about 1/100th.
Of course, I'm not minimizing the need to give multiple choice tests as well.
Okay.
To me, it's really more about the frequency of tests, and I feel very strongly about looking at a kid's day. If How do you feel about even setting aside testing days per subject? Do we want kids to come in and have 4 and 5 tests? Think about the course of their day. If they're in school for 7 hours, if they do have a club or a sport or a family obligation after school,
Mhm.
how much time do they really have to prepare for the exam? If they have 4 or 5 of them in one day, I know people say you should be preparing days in advance, and hopefully many of the older kids are, but I think that's also sometimes unrealistic to expect kids to study 2 and 3, 4 nights ahead of time. It becomes quite challenging.
I think it behooves us to try to organize that and minimize that type of duplication when it comes to the testing, because ultimately, don't we want our kids to perform as well on these tests as they possibly can? And making multiple assessments on the same day is going to reduce the likelihood that they're going to do well on any or all of them. So I think it's in our best interest. I think it's in the kids' best interest to organize to the greatest degree that we can, realistically speaking, some form of space where different subjects can test in different time spans. I know that in the team meetings that I sit in on a almost every other day basis, we're always asking one another when you're testing, just so we can try to make sure there's as little overlap as possible. And we're dealing with the seventh graders in particular with these teams, and I just think it's in their best interest, and it's in the teacher's best interest. You work very hard, and you want to see your students do well, and really demonstrate an understanding of what you've been teaching them. um, why don't you want to give them the greatest opportunity to do to achieve as high as they can on those tests? That would be my thought. And it's also a lot less work on the backside of it, which is having to reteach or go back over things that they don't understand, and especially if they don't understand them because they didn't have time because they were studying for four other tests that day.
Yeah, it's so disheartening when I come into the class and I can tell that the kids are beaten down, and I don't even need to ask them. I know the reason. Oh, we have 5 tests today. Oh, we have 4 tests today. And it's depressing because I don't feel we talk so much about preparing kids for college. I don't feel like that happens in college. Now, I haven't been there in a while, but I feel like they would space it out more because of the nature of the schedule, I guess allows it, but why can't we try a little bit harder on the high school level to make it a little bit more well distributed?
And since you talked about the number of tests, I can't remember any courses in college where I had more than a midterm and a final.
Right. And and if not, maybe there would be 3 tests during the course of the semester.
Right? Maybe.
Right, maybe. I There are other I just feel as if there are other ways that we can assess them. We haven't even talked about there are some kids, I really believe, that have test anxiety. There are kids who,
There's no question about that.
who struggle tremendously. There are students who are very knowledgeable and very hardworking, but do not perform well on tests. I really believe that. And it doesn't mean that they're not going to be incredibly successful in college.
There's rarely a year that goes by where we're giving the big state test where I don't have students panicking somewhere where I'm not sort of taking them on a supervised walk up and down the hallway for a few minutes just to get them back into a place where they can actually focus again and sit down and finish their test, and just trying to kind of de-stress them if I can, just for a couple of minutes, because they absolutely go into panic. Many students, some handle it better than others, but many of them do. Especially when you're talking about special needs students, they typically, I find, have greater levels of testing anxiety than the mainstream students.
Yeah. Well, hopefully Hopefully, the article and the new policies will actually spark some debate throughout schools in America. Or is that way too optimistic?
I think it's way too optimistic.
Really?
Yeah,
Uh,
because according to Arnie Duncan, it's really our fault in the first place. So you're assuming that we'll be able to learn from our own mistakes.
no.
But since we're talking about tests and that's our topic today, let's get into the methods lab segment and talk about the preparation for tests. And this is a mildly debated topic, and that is review sheets and review periods. So, what's your take on the review sheet? And then I want to hear what you have to say about the actual review time in class time that's spent on review.
Right. Well, that's changed throughout my career. Early on, I absolutely devoted an entire class period to reviewing the day before, and I would often do the review sheet with the kids um, in class.
Hmm.
Now that was primarily junior high classes, but I did it regularly, year by year, with no changes. Then, as I got further into my career, I just became concerned that I was devoting too much time to tests. Think about it. If you give a test and you review the day before, and then you give the test, and I do think it's important to go over a test.
Hmm.
What's the per? I've always said that one of my concerns, we give these regions at the end of the year and the kids never get to even see what they did wrong, and we want to, and I understand that there are logistical problems for that,
Right.
but I do think it's something that would be beneficial for kids. So anyway, we're not talking about regions, but you're devoting almost 3 class periods simply to a test. So as I've moved on, I do not review in class anymore. Depending on the type of test I'm giving, sometimes I will provide kids with an key topics that they should focus on. But what sometimes I will actually just give them a review sheet that they can use to study. Again, this all depends on the course and the level. But lately, I've been making review videos where I've created
Oh.
a video, put it on YouTube. So, like, actually, tonight, my students have an essay tomorrow, and there's a 10-minute YouTube video that pretty much goes through the key concepts that they should try to touch upon in the video. And what I like about it,
Now, are those videos that already existed on the web, or are those things that you've
no, I
created for them?
created them myself. So
Okay.
put a PowerPoint up, and then I speak over the PowerPoint.
Hmm.
There's a program I use, and it goes right to YouTube. And I've only been
What
doing.
program do you use, just in case someone's interested
Oh,
who's listening?
it's called Camtasia. I don't get any money from them if you use it. So and it's been
Not yet.
successful. I've been using it. So has the AP World teacher in my school, and the kids really have. They've enjoyed it. They like. First of all, they can watch it on their phone.
Hmm.
They're in class. They can watch it on their iPads or any
So you're doing
device.
like a flipped classroom just for review,
Right.
essentially.
Yeah. Exactly.
Excellent.
And it really. And it's nice because they can access it whenever they want, as many times as they want.
Hmm.
I'm always amazed when I look at the number of views. Now, I could also tell when they're not doing the homework. But, if the number of views is far exceeding the number of students, I don't think there's people out there that are all just randomly watching a review video on the Gilded Age to prepare for an essay.
Well,
Uh,
you are like the Justin Bieber of Gilded
oh,
Age
all right,
web
now
videos.
now we're really going into the sarcasm. But it's been effective, and I think it's a tool I want to utilize even more going forward because it just saves time. I've really the content teachers, the social studies and science teachers often struggle with how are we going to finish, and you have to try to find ways to save
Hmm.
face-to-face opportunities. And I tell the kids that often. I said, they'll say, "Why don't you show me a movie on this?" Or what? I said, because I don't want to give up any face-to-face time
Hmm.
unnecessarily. Things that you can do outside of the classroom.
Hmm.
Why would I do that in the classroom? And I always preface it by saying, if there's something you're not clear about, email me, send me a message,
Mhm.
come to extra help. So I'm not completely dismissing the fact that if they need help to review for something, of
Right.
course I'm available. But I want as much face-to-face time with the class as I can possibly have.
I love that idea because you're really bridging the gap, and it's a perfect compromise because you want to be there to help your students prepare, but you don't want to necessarily sacrifice the time. Also, the other argument that to me is compelling is if you give them too much, if your review sheet is an exact mirror of your test, then you're really not helping anybody, do anything because they're missing a very valuable step in the process, which is learning how to study properly, learning, and that sometimes means overstudying and sometimes means, unfortunately, missing some things, but you learn for next time that you have to cover those things in your preparation. But if you spoon feed them the preparation, they don't learn the preparation skill. And when it comes time to have to step up in more real world situations outside of a classroom, they're going to lack those skills. And if we're talking about college and career readiness, the preparation skills I think are really important to develop. So I don't want to cheat them of that. I also don't want to hold their hand too much because that's not again a fair representation of what the world's going to be like for them, and it cheats them of the opportunity to learn how to best prepare for their assessment on their own.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't want to leave them high and dry because then I don't feel like I'm doing my part either because I do want to be there for the legitimate questions, the legitimate concerns. So your flip review idea, I think, is a really solid one, and it really is a perfect compromise to resolve that issue.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Well, listen, you should get credit when you have a good idea. I mean, as frequent or as infrequent as that may occur. But anyway, I'm taking too many shots. I apologize. But
Oh, no, no, no problem.
y y like I said, you're a gamer. I said it right at the very beginning. So this just proves my point. If you would like to follow us on iTunes, you can subscribe and find us at State of Ed Podcast over there. You can also follow us on the web at stateofedpodcast.com, on Twitter at SOE Podcast, or if you have a question or a comment, you can ask at stateofedpodcast.com. And we're going to put a link to the New York Times article on there. And we also received a really great video, a link to a great video from one of our listeners, and we're going to post that on our website as well. And thank you very much for sending that in. I think it's a really wonderful little quick video that will inspire you if you are a teacher or have anything to do with education. It really sums up very much what we do. So feel free to click on that and enjoy that. Nick, thank you very much for a very interesting and stimulating discussion on testing. And I will see you next time.
All right. Take care.
Have a good one.